Hey guys, Simply Betta here. I'm Taylor, and today I'll be making a walkthrough on how I made this really pretty little 5-gallon planted tank, a low-tech, easy planted tank, and all the steps that I did to make it. And then also how I sort of made it horrible, and then how I fixed it. I wanted a pretty little low-tech tank to be sitting on a shelf in my fish room. A 5-gallon is the perfect size for this shelf. I thought it would be just this beautiful little pop of color in this kind of boring, ugly space. So I've been working on the fish room beautification project for a while now, and everything's looking a little bit better, but it's definitely not done yet. I stopped the project when I got super pregnant and tired, and then after I had my baby, but now it's been like 6 whole weeks, and I'm getting back into the groove and finishing my projects. I'm back. So here's how I made this lovely little tank, the walkthrough, all the steps that I made to make it and my plant choices. And then at the end, how I made it look awful and then how I fixed it again. Because it happens, it happens. I'm starting this with a little 5-gallon tank. I painted the back of this tank and the bottom black because I like the look of a black background. I have a stingray light on the top to illuminate what I'm doing for filming, but that isn't the light that I'll be using at the end. I picked out a few pieces of wood to add to this tank for a little bit of interest and for some places for the inhabitants to hide around. At the end, you'll see who those little fish are. For my plant substrate, I'll be using the line from my sponsor, Brightwell Aquatics. Not only is it rich in nutrients for plants, but it helps soften my water and bring down the pH a little bit. I made this tank shortly after I broke down my planted-themed Hobbit tank, which was super fun to make and I loved it for years, and I'll be making another one soon, by the way, another fantasy-themed planted tank, so stay tuned. After I broke down that Hobbit tank, I saved most of the plants from that project. I put them in plastic bags in the fridge for a while, including this awesomely huge bag of Anubias. There was a pretty good variety because I had that Hobbit tank going for several years, so I chose a selection of plants from my plastic bags and I have them ready here in a tub, ready to plant. So here's my process. My goal is to make a low or medium light tank that's pretty low maintenance. In this tank, I want a beautiful, easy carpet of a root feeding plant that I'll go over. It's important that I have a nutrient-rich substrate. I'm adding a mineral-rich base layer under my substrate because I never want to ever touch this tank ever again. I mean, that's the goal of a low-maintenance tank, right? I just want it to be in here forever. So adding extra minerals for my root-feeding plant carpet sounds amazing. It comes in a few different sizes, and I'm actually using the powder first and then some smaller particulates, then some larger granules. I'm just working my way up in size. I was going fairly quickly since I was juggling a lot the night I was making this tank, so it got dusty. I usually take these steps slow, and I find that spraying some water to wet it down also helps. Adding the main substrate layer is fun. It's where you get to choose some of the look of your tank. I chose the darkest color of substrate for some good contrast against the plants, and I chose the smallest size because I think that's what looks best in small tanks. I usually like to add this kind of substrate with a cup so it doesn't get too dusty. Then decide where you'd like to place your hardscape, whether it's wood, rocks, or decorations. I chose a piece of spiderwood and a piece of Malaysian driftwood because they look nice and I wanted to give places for the inhabitants to hide behind and under. Now it's time to add some plants, but before I do, I saturate the substrate with some water. Having wet substrate makes it way easier to stick plants in and have them stay. I started planting with some algae-covered Vesuvius, which is a really pretty little curly-looking sword plant, and I put it in as a background plant right in the middle. You know, I've never had this plant thrive in my tanks, so I really hope it does well in this one. I grabbed some Anubias lanceolata next, and I tucked it in. Take care not to cover the rhizome with substrate, but you can tuck in the roots or use a weight to hold it down. My air is really dry, so I had to constantly spray with water as I worked to make sure the leaves didn't dry out. This is one of my current favorite plants, Marcellia minutia. This is a little carpeting plant that grows fairly slowly, but it's low maintenance, it doesn't need trimming, it does well in low-tech tanks. This is what I want to carpet the tank and just do really awesome. Next, I added in some water sprite, which is another good low-maintenance tank plant that is bushy and it grows quickly up to the surface, and it can actually be a floating plant too. I put it to one side so as it grows bushy, it will hide the sponge filter. Then I added in some very unhappy looking Monte Carlo as another carpet plant. I tied it to a piece of stainless steel mesh so I could just stick the whole thing in easily and not have to plant tons and tons of tiny little Monte Carlo pieces. I chose some stems of moneywort to hopefully fill up one of the back corners behind the Malaysian driftwood. And of course, this Malaysian driftwood really needs some moss glued to it. I had a lot of mini Christmas moss left over from the Hobbit tank breakdown. Look at this, like packed down. Look at it compared to the size of my head. Just look. Look! A gel super glue works really great for gluing plants to wood or rocks or anything, so seriously, don't use liquid super glue. Use a gel. Next, I glued some Java fern onto my piece of spider wood. I put a bunch of rhizomes onto the piece, which I think is going to look really nice when it fills out. After that, I called it done. I brought the tank down to my fish room and put it onto one of my shelves, and I think it looks really nice. Time to fill it up, which when you're using a planted substrate, the key is to do it slow and gentle so you don't disturb the substrate and make it muddy and your water really cloudy. So I fill it slowly and I use a piece of plastic to bounce the water off so it doesn't directly hit the substrate. I dechlorinated the water and then I added an aquatic plant fertilizer to give them a good start. I dose all my aquariums with a pipette so I can accurately measure the milliliters of how I'm dosing my fertilizer. These sliding glass lids, by the way, are the DIY lids that I make for myself. I'll add a link if you'd like to see for yourself how I made these really cheap, tight-fitting lids. I added a cycled sponge filter from a really healthy, different tank of mine. And I also dosed the tank with a good bacterial starter, which in my case is Florinbacter. I use it for all my tanks, so I have a really big jug. Also, I dose Fast Start, which is basically like a bacteria food. There are several kinds of important bacteria in aquariums that break down waste, and this ensures that each kind has what they need to increase in population and get this tank cycled. Obviously, that's a really simple explanation. So this tank was looking great, and you would think that I put it in my fish room and I took care of it and maintained it properly for a long time, forever and ever. Well, not exactly. Not exactly. Those of you who've been watching me lately might be able to guess what happened. So a few months ago, I was super pregnant and I hit the wall. Mamas out there, you can probably empathize with that late pregnancy exhaustion where you just don't want to do anything at all and you can't. It's like you can't. I saw that coming. I saw the exhaustion coming. So I decided to downsize the fish room. I found new homes for a lot of my fish. And I stopped maintaining my tanks as nice. I pretty much did the bare minimum, like just to maintain and keep the inhabitants of my tanks healthy. But that's like it. As for algae, I didn't care. I didn't care about algae. I didn't care about ugly things. I didn't care about plant die-off. I just didn't care. I didn't care about anything. It took all my strength every day just to run around after my toddler and like keep my family healthy and alive. So I did the bare minimum for a while and I definitely paid the price. A lot of my tanks turned very ugly. Here is what happened to my beautiful little 5-gallon tank. By the time I could pull myself together, my tank looked like this. Actually, it was worse than this. It looked like this. I didn't actually take a picture of the tank before I yanked out just handfuls of this algae that was floating around. This shot is actually when I cleaned it up a little bit. When I finally mustered the strength to fix this tank, the first thing I did was to manually remove as much algae as I could. I just used my hands and some tongs and a turkey baster. It took some time, but I got a lot out. Yuck, look at it flying around. I trimmed up the water sprite first. It was really spindly and brown on the bottom, so I trimmed it and replanted it to make it bushy again to hide that sponge filter. Manually removing all that algae and trimming really made a lot of algae fly up into the water column, so I decided to do a water change. I slowly drained the tank with a python hose and was really careful not to suck up any of the little babies. I got a lot out that way, but I went in with a turkey baster afterwards too to suck up little stubborn clumps. Just finishing that water change made it look so much better. I trimmed some unhealthy looking Anubias leaves. Now, why were they unhealthy? Well, I'm pretty sure it was from storing them in too cold of a fridge before I made the tank, to be honest. All of my Anubias from the Hobbit tank suffered. The mini Christmas moss had a lot of growth since planting, but I had to trim most of it away to get rid of the infestation of hair algae. It would have been impossible to remove. I used a fine net to scoop up the stray trimmings as I worked, being really careful not to catch the little fish. The tank looked so much better now after that first round of cleaning, and it functions better. The algae isn't choking my plants anymore and stealing all the light, and the little fish are not getting stuck in the hair algae anymore. I'll be going over the cute little baby fish in the tank in my next video, so stay tuned for that. I also gave my Marcellia minutia or minutia a trim. I added a handful of Amano shrimp to help chow down on the remaining filth algae that I just couldn't remove. It looks so much better now, but it's still not perfect yet. There was still a lot of algae. To really fix the root of the problem, I have to find a balance for this tank and just be patient. To try to find a balance, I've been doing 50% water changes once a week. I've been feeding my plants a small daily dose of fertilizer and liquid carbon just to keep levels as consistent as I can. This is pretty easy, it's just 1 drop a day from my pipette if I'm dosing daily using these. I think that steady conditions and low tweaks of fertilizer and carbon, light, and water changes are going to be the key to taking back this tank without the use of algae-killing products. It would have been a lot easier to not even let this tank get out of control in the first place, obviously. Oops. It's been 10 days, and I'm happy to not report any more algae. It's just sort of staying the same, although it seems like there's a little less of it. Now I'll do another small tweak, like to reduce the light duration or the intensity, and let that go for a few weeks and see if that makes a significant difference. What is your favorite solution for a hair algae situation without going high-tech? Would you try to do it naturally? Would you use an algae-killing product? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.